Charge! To victory!
The great conquests of the Pharaohs are often depicted as epic chariot battles and the glint of bronze weapons under the scorching sun. However, the real victory was forged long before the armies met on the battlefield. The main enemy of the Egyptian soldier was not a foreign warrior with a sword, but the merciless desert, capable of killing an army in a single day. History is silent about how thousands of people crossed the dead sands without losing their fighting spirit and strength. It was not a triumph of military tactics, but of cold mathematics and impeccable supply organization. Scientists have calculated that supplying the army with water and food required an effort comparable to the construction of the pyramids. Every step a soldier took was calculated by scribes. Every sip of water was recorded in state scrolls. Without this invisible but enormous work, Egypt would never have gone beyond the fertile Nile Valley. We are used to seeing gold en masse, but we forget about the rough sacks of grain that sustained the empire. Watch the video to the end to find out how ordinary onions saved entire garrisons and why sandals were worth their weight in gold. What if I told you that everything you believed about ancient wars is not true? We are used to thinking that the outcome of a war is decided by generals and their strategic genius on the battlefield. In reality, in the Egyptian desert, the outcome of a campaign was decided by the chief scribe, sitting in the silence of the archive. It was he who calculated the weight of the load that one person could carry without losing speed. An error in the calculations of just 1 kilogram could lead to disaster after a week of travel. The Egyptian army was not just a crowd of armed men, but a complex living mechanism. Each soldier consumed a strictly defined amount of calories and water necessary to maintain his strength. The scribes knew in advance how much grain would be needed for an army of 10,000 for a 20-day journey. They even took into account the natural loss of food during transportation under the scorching sun. This was a level of logistics that Europe only achieved thousands of years later. The main currency in the desert was not gold or silver, but the weight of the load carried. Soldiers carried a minimum set of equipment to conserve strength for battle. Anything superfluous was ruthlessly cut out because every gram weighed heavily on their shoulders under the scorching heat. Personal belongings were reduced to the absolute minimum necessary for basic survival. Even weapons were checked for balance between effectiveness and weight. The organization of supplies began long before the army left the gates of their home city. Temporary warehouses and staging areas were set up along the planned route. Special detachments were sent ahead in advance to prepare places to sleep. They left supplies of food and water in camouflaged hiding places. This allowed the main army to move quickly without being weighed down by huge supply trains. The secret lay in the strictest discipline in the consumption of resources by each individual soldier. No one had the right to eat their ration ahead of time or drink an extra sip of water. Violating this rule endangered not only the life of the offender, but also the safety of the entire detachment. Commanders monitored the distribution of supplies with fanatical precision. It was this system that allowed the Egyptians to pass where other armies perished. The Egyptians understood that the desert does not forgive carelessness and lack of planning. Each crossing was planned taking into account the time of day and the position of the sun in the sky. The army moved during the hours when the heat was still tolerable for humans. They waited out the midday heat in shelters, conserving precious moisture in their bodies. Particular attention was paid to the speed at which a huge mass of people could move across loose sand. Scribes calculated the average stride length and number of stops per kilometer of the journey. If the army slowed down, the entire schedule for delivering water and food would collapse. Therefore, the pace of the march was maintained strictly and rigorously, regardless of fatigue. Stopping at an unplanned location could mean death from dehydration. This supply system worked like clockwork thanks to the Pharaoh's centralized authority. The state apparatus could mobilize the resources of the entire country to support a single campaign. Grain from storehouses all along the river flowed to the army's assembly points. Thousands of craftsmen made baskets and containers for water. We often underestimate the role of simple administrators in the history of great conquest. But it was the Egyptian bureaucrats with their reed sticks in their hands who created the first empire. They turned the chaos of war into an orderly process of moving resources. Their weapons were lists, reports, and mathematical formulas. Without them, even the bravest warrior would have been just a man in the desert. It is interesting to consider how this topic is perceived by modern people, who are accustomed to having stores at every turn. Are we capable of imagining such a level of self-discipline and planning today? Where are you looking at us from? Write in the comments whether you could survive a week with only what you can carry on your back. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the most valuable substance in the desert was obtained? Water for the Egyptian army was not just a resource, but a sacred substance that determined the limits of what was possible. To supply an army of thousands, it took more than just water skins. It took entire rivers carried by hand. Water logistics were the most difficult and responsible element of any military campaign. Without it, even the most formidable weapon became a useless piece of metal. The Egyptians used a complex system of mobile reservoirs made from specially treated hides. The leather had to be tanned in a special way so that the water would not spoil in the heat. Craftsmen coated the skins with fat and resin to ensure that the seams were completely watertight. Each of these water skins was carefully counted and guarded more closely than the Pharaoh's treasury. Losing a water container was considered a serious crime. During a campaign, the army could not rely solely on what it had brought with it. Water scouts, elite specialists, walked a day ahead of the main army. They knew how to find hidden sources by the color of the sand and the behavior of insects. These people read the desert like an open book, noticing the slightest signs of moisture. The lives of thousands of soldiers following behind depended on their skill. If there was no ready source, the Egyptians dug temporary wells in the beds of dry rivers. Engineers knew at what depth groundwater could be found in a given area. They used special filters made of cloth and sand to purify the murky liquid. The soldiers drank this water, knowing that it would give them life the next day. No one complained about the taste when the alternative was death. The creation of intermediate stations with water supplies for the return journey was a special art. The Egyptians buried sealed vessels in the sand in strictly defined locations, marking them with landmarks. These life capsules allowed the returning army to cross the desert without heavy loads. Knowledge of the coordinates of these hiding places was a state secret of the highest order. An enemy who learned the location of the caches could destroy the army without firing a single shot. Transporting water required enormous effort from porters and support personnel. People carried heavy vessels on yokes, distributing the weight evenly. Every step with a full water bag on hot sand was a test of endurance. The water carriers were as much heroes of the campaign as the archers or spearmen. Their labor ensured the physical existence of the army. There was a strict water rationing system, which varied depending on the air temperature. Commanders personally ensured that soldiers drank frequently, but in small sips. This allowed them to maintain their body's water balance without feeling heavy in the stomach. Uncontrolled water consumption was strictly prohibited, as it led to a rapid loss of supplies. Drinking discipline was part of the military code. The Egyptians also knew how to desalinate or purify water using natural minerals. They added certain types of clay to vessels, which precipitated impurities to the bottom. Plant additives were also used to kill dangerous microorganisms. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation and preserved by priests and healers. Science served the war effort, making the impossible possible. The attitude towards water shaped the unique mentality of the Egyptian warrior, which differed from that of other peoples. He knew the value of every drop and was able to endure thirst longer than his opponent. This gave them a psychological advantage during long marches or while waiting for battle. While the enemy was going mad with thirst, the Egyptians remained calm and strong. Water was their secret ally in the lifeless sands. Engineering solutions for water extraction and storage allowed Egypt to control trade routes. They built large cisterns in key oases, turning them into impregnable. These garrisons could withstand long sieges thanks to their well-managed reserves. The desert yielded to those who knew how to manage its meager gifts. Do you think control over resources is a more important factor in victory than the size of an army? Want to know a secret that will change your perception of a soldier's diet? We are used to thinking that the strength of an army depends on meat. The basis of a soldier's diet was a special bread, baked so that it would not spoil for months. These were hard cakes that often had to be soaked in water before eating. They were light, nutritious, and took up little space in a backpack. The second most important element that saved the army from disease was the common onion. The Egyptians revered it not only as food, but also as a powerful medicine. Onions and garlic served as the main antiseptics in the unsanitary conditions of ancient military campaigns. Daily consumption of onions strengthened the immune system and helped fight intestinal infections. Soldiers believed that onions gave them the strength and endurance of an ox. Dried fish was the main source of protein during long journeys through the desert. Fish were caught in huge quantities in the Nile, salted and dried in the hot sun. This product could be stored for a very long time without losing its nutritional properties. It was light, compact, and did not require cooking, which saved fuel. It was the ideal dry ration of the ancient world. Cooking hot food in the desert was a difficult logistical task due to the lack of firewood.
Stew tastes better under the stars, doesn't it?
It certainly does. A moment of peace.
Fires were lit in small pits to maximize heat retention and protect the flames from the wind. Hot food, even simple porridge, was important for maintaining morale. A shared pot brought the troops together and gave them a sense of home. Oil and fat were also part of the mandatory set of products for each soldier. Vegetable oil was used not only for food, but also to protect the skin from the sun. Fat was added to porridge to increase its calorie content and satiety. The Egyptians understood that hard work requires a lot of energy. The balance of fats and carbohydrates was maintained intuitively but correctly. The food distribution system was strict and prevented theft or fraud. Scribe kept track of every sack of grain and every basket of fish. Rations were issued to unit commanders, who then distributed them among the soldiers. This bureaucracy ensured that every soldier received his share, regardless of rank. A hungry soldier is a poor defender of the pharaoh. Sometimes the rations were supplemented by what could be obtained by hunting along the way. The desert was home to antelopes and hares, which could add variety to the soldiers' meals. However, hunting was not the main source of food, as it required time and effort. It was more of a pleasant bonus and entertainment during rest stops. The basis always remained the reliable and boring provisions from the supplies. Egyptian doctors monitored the quality of food to prevent poisoning in the army. Spoiled products were ruthlessly destroyed, even if supplies were running low. The simplicity and effectiveness of the Egyptian diet has been proven by thousands of years of successful warfare. They did not seek sophistication, but relied on the durability, calorie content, and benefits of food. This diet created some of the most enduring warriors in human history. Food was the fuel that drove the military machine forward. If you enjoyed learning about the diet, please like this video. Guess how long it took to create the perfect footwear for the desert? We rarely think about the fact that the main means of transportation in ancient times was human feet. The condition of the soldiers' feet determined the speed and range of movement of the entire army. Egyptian sandals were an engineering marvel, made from papyrus or specially treated leather. They protected the soles from hot sand and sharp stones, allowing the feet to. However, sandals were a valuable resource that had to be saved for the most difficult terrain. Soldiers often walked barefoot on soft sand, carrying their shoes in their hands or on their belts. This prolonged the life of the sandals, which wore out quickly with constant walking. Commanders made sure that shoes were worn only when absolutely necessary. Worn-out sandals could turn a warrior into a burden for the entire unit. The rhythm of the march was strictly regulated to avoid premature fatigue. The army did not move as a chaotic crowd, but at a measured pace set by drums. This rhythm helped the soldiers fall into a kind of trance and feel less tired. Foot care was a mandatory evening procedure for every Egyptian soldier. Various oils and ointments were used to soften the rough skin of the feet. Cracks and calluses could cause serious problems, so they were treated immediately. Doctors had special kits for caring for the feet of soldiers. Healthy feet were a national treasure. In addition to sandals, special bandages were used to protect the shins from thorns. Desert vegetation often had hard thorns that could cause painful wounds. Fabric bandages protected the feet from scratches and minor injuries. It was a simple but effective precaution. There were no minor details in the equipment for a long march. Repairing shoes in the field was a skill that every soldier possessed. They always carried spare straps, pieces of leather, and tools for repairs. If a sandal broke, it had to be repaired at the nearest rest stop. The ability to maintain one's equipment was part of basic training. The autonomy of the soldier increased the survivability of the entire army. The Egyptians also understood the importance of resting their feet during long stops. Soldiers tried to keep their feet elevated to improve blood flow and reduce swelling. Foot massage was a common practice that helped restore muscles after exertion. These simple recovery methods allowed the army to get up and go again every morning. Caring for the body was a pragmatic necessity. Footwear was also a marker of status and belonging to a particular unit. Elite units could have higher quality leather sandals of complex design. Light infantry made do with simpler woven versions made of reeds. But regardless of quality, the function was the same: to insulate the wearer from the scorching ground. Without this insulation, warfare in the desert would have been impossible. The history of Egyptian conquest is a history of millions of steps taken in woven sandals. Footwear was the foundation on which the mobility of the Pharaoh's army stood. They conquered space step by step, maintaining their combat effectiveness where others fell exhausted. Could you walk 30 kilometers across the sand in such shoes? The Great Nile was not just a source of water, but the main transport artery of the Egyptian military machine. The river allowed huge loads to be transported over enormous distances with minimal energy expenditure. A flotilla of cargo ships followed the army's movements as closely as possible. The ships carried the main supplies of grain, heavy weapons, and equipment, relieving the soldiers of their burdens. This allowed the army to maintain its freshness and high speed of movement. The Egyptians skillfully used the natural forces of the river to navigate in both directions. The current carried the ships north to the delta in the Mediterranean Sea. The wind blowing from the sea drove the ships under sail south against the current. This unique feature of the Nile made logistics two-way and very efficient. Nature itself helped the pharaohs move their armies across their country. Loading and unloading ships was perfected to the point of automation in river ports. There were special berths and ramps for quickly moving cargo ashore. Thousands of workers and slaves ensured a continuous flow of supplies from water to land. This system worked flawlessly, resembling the conveyor belt of a modern factory. Ship downtime was kept to a minimum. The Nile provided a link between the army and the central government in the capital. Fast boats with messengers constantly traveled up and down the river. The pharaoh received reports and sent orders in the shortest possible time. The empire's information connectivity was critical to managing a large war. The Nile was the nervous system of the state. Using the river solved the problem of animal fatigue and cart wear and tear. The water took on the weight that would have broken the backs of thousands of donkeys and oxen. However, dependence on the river also dictated certain limitations in strategy. Venturing deep into the desert required the creation of a complex chain of land supplies. Commanders always took into account the distance to the nearest navigable water. The river was an anchor that held them in place. Egyptian shipbuilders created special military transports with a shallow draft. These ships could approach the shore closely, even in places where there were no equipped ports. Their flat bottoms allowed them to avoid running aground in the river's changing course. Engineers adapted the fleet to the specific needs of military logistics. Protecting river convoys was a separate important task for military sailors. Enemies could try to cut off supply routes by attacking ships from land or water. Therefore, cargo ships were always accompanied by warships with archers. Safety on the river guaranteed the lives of soldiers in the desert. the Nile had to remain under the complete control of the pharaoh. River logistics were the foundation of Egypt's power, invisible to the outside observer. It was thanks to the Nile that the Egyptians were able to concentrate enormous forces in the right place at the right time. Water carried the burden of war, allowing people to engage in battle. Without this blue road, sand was the worst enemy not only for people, but also for their weapons. Fine abrasive dust penetrated everywhere, grinding down metal, clogging mechanisms, and damaging bowstrings. Egyptian soldiers spent hours cleaning and maintaining their equipment every day. Bronze hoplites, curved swords, had to be constantly polished and lubricated with grease. Without this, the metal quickly oxidized and lost its combat qualities. Bows, the main long-range weapon of the Egyptians, required special attention in the dry climate. The wooden sinew could dry out and crack in the heat, rendering the weapon useless. Bows were stored in special cases and regularly lubricated with oils to maintain their flexibility. The bowstrings were removed during rest stops so as not to stretch them unnecessarily. Caring for a bow was an art that took years to learn. Chariots, the elite of the army, were complex mechanisms that were extremely sensitive to sand. The axles of the wheels required constant lubrication with animal fat to prevent them from jamming while in motion. Leather elements of armor and shields also suffered from drying out in sunlight. They were impregnated with wax and oils to maintain strength and elasticity. A cracked shield strap in battle could cost a warrior his life. Repairmen constantly checked the condition of all equipment, replacing worn parts. The Egyptians used fabric covers and wraps to protect their weapons during marches. Swords and daggers were only taken out of their sheaths for cleaning or combat. They tried to avoid unnecessary contact between metal and air or sand. The fabric protected not only from dirt, but also from the metal overheating in the sun. A red-hot sword was impossible to hold in your hand. Arrowheads and spearheads were sharpened regularly, as sand and stones quickly dulled the bronze. Special whetstones were carried for this purpose. Sharp weapons gave an advantage in battle against enemies with less well-maintained equipment. Egyptian soldiers knew that their lives depended on the sharpness of their blades. Weapon maintenance discipline was ironclad. Special attention was paid to protecting the eyes and respiratory tracts of the horses pulling the chariots. Dust storms could blind the animals and render them useless. Special blankets and mesh eye covers were used. Caring for the animals was part of the technical maintenance of the combat unit.
It will suffice.
The arsenals had strict standards for accepting weapons after a campaign.
Dismissed.
Damaged or poorly maintained equipment was written off, and those responsible were punished. This forced soldiers to treat government property as their own. Master armorers accompanied the army, carrying portable forges and tools. They could repair serious damage right in the field. Complex repairs to chariots or the reforging of swords were carried out on the spot. This ensured a high degree of autonomy for the army far from its bases. Technical support was excellent. The battle against the sand was an endless and exhausting war that soldiers fought every day. But it was this routine work that ensured the superiority of Egyptian weapons at the decisive moment. To conquer the desert meant keeping your sword sharp and your chariot fast. Attention to detail made the army invincible. In the endless sea of sand, where there were no roads or signposts, the ability to navigate was the key to survival. Egyptian guides, known as pathfinders, were the elite of the intelligence services. They knew by heart the contours of the dunes, which changed with the wind, and the position of the stars. Their memory was the map by which the huge army moved. A mistake by a guide meant the death of the entire army. Travel often took place at night to avoid the heat of the day, so the stars were the main beacons. The Egyptians had a deep knowledge of astronomy, which allowed them to determine their direction accurately. The North Star and the constellations served as constant landmarks in the darkness. Priest astronomers often accompanied expeditions, helping to chart the course. The sky was more reliable than the earth. Stone pyramids built by scouts marked safe paths and water sources. These signs were only understandable to their own people and useless to outsiders. The system of markers created an invisible road network. Scouts went far ahead, checking the terrain for ambushes and natural traps. Quicksand or impassable rocks could stop an army and make it vulnerable. The Egyptians also used the knowledge of local tribes, hiring them as trackers. These people, born in the desert, intuitively sensed its mood and dangers. However, they were never fully trusted, and information was always double-checked. An alliance with the desert dwellers was beneficial but required caution. Reconnaissance was conducted not only on the ground, but also from above. Observers occupied the tops of hills and rocks, scanning the horizon for many kilometers. Signal mirrors or smoke were used to quickly transmit messages to the main column. The communication system allowed the army to respond to threats long before direct contact. The eyes of the army could see far. The ability to find their way in the void made the Egyptian army omnipresent and unpredictable to their enemies. They appeared where they were not expected and disappeared, dissolving into the sands. Navigation was an art that transformed the chaos of the desert into an orderly space. The Egyptians built roads where nature had created nothing. Behind the heroes with swords stood an army of people with papyrus and brushes, military scribes. They were the true architects of victory, turning the chaos of supply into orderly columns of numbers. Every soldier, every bough, every sack of grain was recorded and accounted for in huge scrolls. This total accounting allowed the pharaoh to know exactly what resources he had at his disposal. Order in the documents meant order in the troops. The scribes were responsible for the timely calculation of allowances and the distribution of rewards after battle. Soldiers knew that their service was recorded and that their families would receive what they were entitled to if they died. This created motivation and confidence in the future. The social guarantees provided by the bureaucracy were the foundation of loyalty. The scribe was the guarantor of justice for the ordinary soldier. Casualties and injuries were recorded with frightening accuracy, allowing for an assessment of the combat effectiveness of units. Commanders received reports on the status of their troops every morning. This helped them make informed decisions about who to send into battle and who to send to the rear. War statistics helped to protect people and use them as effectively as possible.
If we move the cohort here, the supply lines stretch thin.
The training of scribes was a long and complex process that created a caste of intellectual elites. They had to know not only literacy, but also mathematics, geography, and the basics of military affairs. A scribe was an advisor to the commander, capable of calculating the consequences of any decision. Intelligence and knowledge were valued in war, no less than strength and courage.
But instructor, the scroll...
Bureaucracy allowed campaigns to be planned years in advance, creating strategic reserves. Egypt could afford long wars because it knew how to manage its resources for the long term. Warehouses were filled with grain in good harvest years to feed the army in years of crop failure. State planning smoothed out risks and ensured stability. Quality control of equipment also fell on the shoulders of administrators. They checked deliveries from craftsmen, rejecting bad arrows or brittle shields. Corruption and theft were severely punished as the security of the country was at stake. An honest official was as important as a valiant general. Logistical control forged victory on the front lines. Lists of recruits allowed for quick and organized mobilization. Each Nam, region, knew how many people it had to put under the pharaoh's banner. The conscription system worked flawlessly for centuries, ensuring a constant influx of fresh forces. The organization of human resources was the pinnacle of administrative art. The people were the main capital. Even on the march, scribes continued to keep a chronicle of events, recording feats and mistakes. These records became textbooks for future generations of commanders. The experience of war was not lost, but accumulated and analyzed. History taught not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Memory was an instrument of progress. The Egyptian military machine was the first in history to rely on the power of the state apparatus. Bureaucracy, which we are accustomed to criticizing, was synonymous with order and civilization in ancient times. Scribes created a structure that allowed Egypt to dominate the region for millennia. Organization defeated barbarism. Ultimately, it was the human factor that decided everything. The soldiers' will to advance despite the heat and fear. Egyptian discipline was based not only on fear of punishment, but also on deep religious faith. The pharaoh was a living god, and serving him was a sacred duty that guaranteed life in the afterlife. The presence of the divine ruler at the head of the army gave the soldiers a powerful moral backbone. Faith was stronger than armor.
Your bravery is rewarded.
Hail the commander! We fight for Egypt!
Follow me! Show them the
Commanders
might of
set an
Egypt.
example of fortitude by enduring the same hardships as the rank and file. The pharaoh, leading the attack in his chariot, inspired more than any speech could. Trust in leaders was the foundation of the army's morale. Authority was earned through sweat and blood, not just titles. Leadership was real, not nominal. The belief that Egypt was the only civilized land surrounded by chaos gave meaning to the war. Soldiers defended not just borders, but the very world order established by the gods, Mat. The feeling of being right and superior made them unshakable. Ideology was the cement that held the empire together. The Egyptian army was not just a military force, but a spiritual brotherhood united by purpose and discipline. The psychology of the victors was forged through years of training and campaigns. It was their strength of spirit that allowed them to overcome the physical limits of what was possible. The desert bowed down to those who were harder than stone.
All supplies logged, Tribune. Opsio, prepare the century
We
to
have
march.
seen that the
We
secret
move
of the
now.
Egyptian army's power lay not in the magic of the priests
Drink the
or in
water
secret
and rest.
technologies,
You will
but in
rejoin the ranks
impeccable
soon.
organization.
Yes, medic.
Logistics, supply, medicine, and discipline were the pillars on which the military power of the pharaohs rested. They turned survival into a science and war into a calculation. The winner was the one who calculated better, planned better, and endured better. The Egyptians proved that even the most hostile environment can be conquered by the power of human intellect and order. Their experience became the foundation for all subsequent great armies in history. The lessons learned in the sands thousands of years ago are still relevant today. Amateurs talk about tactics, professionals talk about logistics. What do you think about this approach to war? Do you agree that order beats class, or is personal heroism still more important than dry calculations? Write your opinion in the comments, suggest topics for new historical analyses, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos.